Do you remember hearing this from Boris Johnson 5 years ago?
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households.
What about this message repeatedly from the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty?
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Well, the long-running and costly COVID inquiry delivered a damning verdict yesterday. Take a listen to its chair, Baroness Hallett.
I can summarise my findings of the response as too little, too late. The failure to lock down earlier may have cost lives. Had the lockdown been imposed 1 week earlier than the 23rd of March, the evidence suggests that the number of deaths in England alone in the first wave up until the 1st of July 2020 would have been reduced by 48%. That is approximately 23,000 fewer deaths.
Well, extraordinary, Alex. This report works out at £171,000 per page, apparently. So the lawyers have been great winners from lockdown.
I could have done it. I would have done it for them for half the price and come up with better conclusions that we all knew already existed. There we go. She also said lockdown could have been avoided altogether if steps such as social distancing and isolating those with symptoms had been introduced earlier, and there was a toxic and chaotic culture in government that impacted decision-making. I just cannot get my head around this. I really, really can't. This is a complete establishment stitch-up, this whole inquiry. It's cost the taxpayer millions and millions of pounds. It's come to the same conclusions that they came up with, which I think a lot of it is based on pseudo-science, that lockdowns were good for the country and that we should have done them earlier, longer and harder. Well, actually, I would love to know why this inquiry didn't investigate how many deaths are impacted as a result of NHS waiting lists that went through the roof afterwards, how many people lost their jobs, the economy. All these questions were just accepting blindly, again, follow the science, blindly again accepting that we should just have listened to them and locked down longer and harder, when I think actually that cure was worse than the disease.
And one of the arguments is that there wasn't a control. Nobody could have known what would have happened if we hadn't have locked down. But there was a control, and that was Sweden. They didn't lock down, and they had a lower death rate, and their economy has obviously got back on track much quicker than ours. And I think also it's both too soft on the government, but too harsh at the same time, because I think the political pressure within Number 10 and within the government was enormous. And we're a democracy. Of course, they're going to be listening to what people say and what the free press say. And I'm afraid some people in the media were the ones egging on for lockdown. The Labour Party egging on for lockdown. I think, to be fair to Boris Johnson, it would have been unbelievably difficult for him to resist lockdown, the first one or the second or the third, because of the pressure from the public and the media. So I think it's unfair to completely blame him. And actually, some of the WhatsApp messages that came out made clear that he was very nervous about the restrictions on freedom, and his instincts were not to lock down.
Yeah.
So I think it's both too harsh and misunderstanding the political reality, but also just following the blind kind of assumptions made at the time that lockdowns would work, that they would be worth it. And actually, the first kinds of messages that were put out was just that we should protect the vulnerable, we should cover the vulnerable in cotton wool, but everyone else should get on with it and not be frightened.
Well, that just makes sense, doesn't it?
So why did we switch? That's the question they should have been asking.
Hospitals already operate under a similar assumption. If there's a ward where people are most likely to get sick, well, if you're ill, they will say to you, don't come onto this ward, please. We need this ward to be sterile. We need it to be sick people to get away. You could make this worse. This is the problem. We treated everybody in the same blanket. And where is the full-blown criticism of Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance? That's what I want to know. We were told time and time again, follow the science. Well, the science was you should question science. History, the whole point of science is it's a debate, and we weren't even allowed to debate. People were censored en masse. It's completely insane.
Well,
using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Obviously, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vance are not here to defend themselves, and no doubt they faced enormous pressure as well. But we are going to carry on discussing this because joining us now is the COVID data expert, Tim White. Tim, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Do you think the COVID inquiry is value for money?
Well, morning, Miriam. Morning, Alex. Thanks for inviting me on. Frankly, no, I have to agree with a lot of what you said. Even though I was in favour of vaccines, I still am. Even though I thought that there probably was a good case for lockdowns early on because of the policy that had been pursued by the government. But you rightly brought up there Sweden as well, because they did have lower excess deaths than us by the end of the pandemic. But they too, in their own inquiry, were criticised for not acting early enough. But I think most of the mistakes were made very early on by most countries. Indeed, we saw what happened in Italy, but no one reacted quickly enough. Everyone panicked a little bit, and it was a bit of overcaution, I think, if we're honest. You had to follow the scientists because we had no other data to go on at that time, and their advice was critical. In hindsight, whether it's wrong, well, we're all kind of perfect in hindsight, aren't we? But I don't think, as Alex, you were saying, quite a lot of those questions you were asking weren't answered. I think that we shouldn't just be apportioning blame. We should be saying, well, how should it have been done and how will it be done in the future? Because it didn't address that, for me, Baroness Hallett's report, adequately enough.
And this is the problem I've got with it, Tim, because I expected millions of pounds being spent on this inquiry, that it would be quite in-depth. And when we don't even know, we haven't even got a conclusion as to where the government thinks the virus came from. There's so many questions missing. It seemed like the whole inquiry really focused on political aspects of how the government was run at the time, the politicians, the people surrounding the government, rather than the broader impacts of some of those decisions. How on earth do you think we've missed some of that? Because the data is available, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, I mean, as I say, I was really disappointed as well, Alex. There is a lot of political criticism, a lot of it justified. You know, Boris held his hands up, others are being found guilty of nefarious activity, shall we say. In Boris Johnson's defence, I think you have to say it was difficult for any leader, and particularly one in a liberal society, as we still are here in the UK. And as you said as well, quite a lot of your viewers have been saying that Boris's natural inclination was not to lock down, and therefore he probably did leave it a little bit too late for this inquiry's point of view. But the main really negligent behaviour, I think, was putting vulnerable people at risk with the care homes fiasco. That was just absolutely diabolical. And nothing really has been done about that either, because that did clearly cause lives. There was mass spreading in care homes when people were sent out of hospital without being checked. And that's just elementary. That's not science. That's just common sense. The other thing, I'm quite forgiving, because none of us knew, none of us had lived through a pandemic. The last pandemic was before real good records, before mass communication, before widespread air travel. Things spread so quickly. And the report probably does have a case to say that we didn't act early enough at all. But then had we acted early enough, maybe there wasn't such a case for a lockdown after all, once we could have judged the spread and, as you say, isolated the most vulnerable.
Tim, you're a data expert. I'm really interested in your view of how the data was presented to the public, because never before in history has there been a time when the British public has been bombarded with numbers each and every evening. And I think something that seemed to be missed at the time was context. So we were told 100 people have died today from COVID, 200 people have died today from COVID. But we were never told, or most people just wouldn't know, that on average 1,500 people die a day in the UK, 600,000 a year. That's normal. And so people had no context, and perhaps that contributed to the fear.
Well, the deaths that were published each night, either, as you see on the videos with this sort of thing, or on government papers that were handed out to the media and available to the public, were only those that included COVID on the death certificate. So these were likely to be excess deaths. However, a lot of those people were so elderly, they probably would have died within that year or within 12 months anyway. So it's at the end extrapolating the excess deaths, which is what the media did become quite good at when they eventually got their head around it and got some experts involved. Because in the early days, it was just stupidity and chaos. I think I was the first person in the country to pretty quickly work out that the figures were down at weekends, not because there were few people, because there was less reporting, because people, doctors and other people in hospitals just weren't there to report that there were the number of cases there were over the weekend, the number of admissions. Then suddenly we get a bump on a Monday, everyone would panic, and you just have to take the clear path through the middle. So there was a lot of problems. But during the early days, as I said, very few people knew really what they were doing, and I'm not being unkind in that. They had no experience to measure it against.
Well, Tim White, COVID data expert, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your view